Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Ranking the Albums. In the co-captain's chair today, Mr. Chuck Alvarez from the In the Prague Seat show.
Good
Welcome, my
afternoon.
friend.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Pete. Good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. We got people watching from all over the world, so I have no idea where everybody's from. It's afternoon. It's just past afternoon in our time here on this glorious Sunday. Well, maybe not so glorious, but and Chuck is wearing the jersey of our beloved New York Mets. So we didn't have a beloved fun day yesterday, but that's a topic for another day, I guess. Today we're going to be ranking the studio albums of jazz fusion legends Weather Report. We've been talking about doing this one for quite a while, and the day has finally arrived. So we're looking at 14 studio albums. So guys, everybody get your drink and your lunch, whatever. Sit down, be patient, have fun with this. We've got a lot of albums to go through. And as Chuck and I were kind of giggling about before we started taping, there's some varying quality in this catalog. There's some absolute masterpieces, and there's some stuff that, well, we'll get to it when we get to it. So I'll have Chuck kick us off with his number 14.
Oh, thanks again, Pete. As far as the Weather Report albums, the album that I'm going to pick that's probably the least of my favorites of them all. I don't think that they've ever done any bad albums. It's just the fact that, once certain members started becoming less of a point within the band and it became more towards Joseph Zawinul, I would say that their last album featured This Is It from 1986 is my least favorite because it was basically the precursor to what he would be doing with the Joseph Zawinul Syndicate, and Weather Update. Because you had very little Wayne Shorter. Wayne Shorter by this time had lost a lot of, he lost a lot with this as far as the project went, and they had Carl Santana here mostly singing from other bands, and we already know how when you think of bands like Manhattan Transfer, great band, great vocal band, but once they started singing more on the album, it just became more of a Joseph Zawinul project, and that's mine.
Yeah, and I had also heard that the This Is This album was apparently never even supposed to happen. They thought, the band thought, I don't know how this happens with management when you have a management team. They thought that they had already fulfilled their contract with what was it, Columbia, and then they were like, okay, we're done. And then the record label was like, no, you guys have one more album due in this contract. And they're like, oh, so they just kind of threw it together really fast. So yeah. Yeah, you said it perfectly. It's like the last, probably quarter of this catalog, it basically became the Joe Zawinul band. And I think early on, you had, Wayne Shorter and Miroslav Vitus or, Jaco Pastorius, whatever. Everybody was writing, everybody's contributing. And the last 4 albums, right, are basically very keyboard heavy, very Zawinul-ish. Not that that's a bad thing, but this was such a great ensemble early on and through much of their catalog that you listen to. I found this very interesting going and revisiting this whole catalog again in recent weeks and really hearing the differences from, the early albums, that middle period, and then the latter period. It's almost like 3 different bands, right?
Yes.
There are characteristics that are present in all the eras, but yeah, the latter part is kind of spotty, as my number 14 is going to be Sport and Life.
Okay.
From 1986. So this is the second to last album. So this is what they thought their last album was going to be. They put this thing out and they're like, okay, that's it. We're done. Contract's over. No. You know what? As much as the one you just talked about is kind of a mediocre album, I find this one even less exciting. I don't know, this feels like a lifeless album. It's kind of, to me, kind of boring jazz rock, kind of a precursor to what we knew, and we're both New Yorkers, that whole smooth jazz thing that was all the rage on the East Coast, right after this into the early 90s. There's a lot of funk on here. There's some R&B on here. You got all these vocals, these scat and chanting scat vocals, not just straight out vocals. It's like just throwing vocals in just to, instead of adding a saxophone melody or solo, let's put a little scat vocal in, right?
Exactly.
And again, that goes back to not giving the rest of the guys in the band much to do other than, playing out Zawinul's, compositions. So I don't know. For me, I don't really have a lot to recommend from here.
Hmm.
Pearl on the Half Shell is a pretty good track.
It really
Uh,
is. Hmm.
that's probably my favorite. Wayne Shorter's Face on the Barroom Floor is a really cool. I mean, it's a great title. And that's what his one contribution here, and
Yes.
that's a
Hmm.
pretty nice song. I mean, that's
It
like a
really is.
cool melodic jazz piece. So I dig that. The rest of it, it's kind of forgettable. And you
Hmm.
hate to say that about a Weather Report album, but I just
Exactly.
find this album really lackluster. Again, not awful, but considering the greatness that we're going to talk about in a little bit, I think it pales in comparison. So that's my
Exactly.
number 14.
Exactly. Um, well, my next one from this one is an album that was heavily maligned by so many, both by critics, fans, but did very well as far as the jazz, like in the jazz realm. But mine would be with all the talent that they had is Mr. Gone. Mr. Gunn, what's a great compositions, but it was just way too keyboard heavy. With the talent that they had on there, for it to be so keyboard oriented, just was a bot. It just was a bot. The song on here that I love very much, River People. Which just sounds much better live because you get to hear all the musicians on there, and the title track is probably the most it's a great song, but just too keyboard, or you thought you were listening to Depeche Mode or something. Oh man, yeah, but that's my take on Mr. Gone. Not one of my favorites from them,
Okay.
despite the talent.
Yeah, I think you can find I like that a little bit more than you do, but that's okay. That's what it's all about, right? That's what it's all about. My number 13, Chuck has already talked about. This is this. Yeah, this is, way too many vocals on here. This is the last album. This is basically an R&B and funk album.
Yes.
I will say, Carlos Santana's guitar solos on here on those couple tracks are pretty great.
Amazing.
They don't fit, but they're really good. And it's just like, I mean, he plays on the title track and Man with the Copper Fingers. And to me, that's the highlight of the album. The rest of it's pretty forgettable. So, and that album cover. Oof.
Oh yeah, that's a terrible.
And this one too. It's like, oh, these album covers are awful. It's like, ooh. I mean, how much time was spent putting those together? I don't know. Anyway,
oh man. Oh man. Well, my next album is Sporting Life. Sporting Life. To me, I have a couple of other songs on there that I do like. I thought that the last 3 songs were probably just a little bit more jazz oriented, but once again, with the talent that they had on there, the latter period, of Victor Bailey on drums and Omar Hakim on drums, you would think that they would just be killing it. But these last 2 albums, Joseph Zawinu, he was going in a direction which was probably more world and R&B-ish. And I guess that right about that time that Wayne Shorter was starting to lose interest in the band. Yeah. That's my pick, which is Sporting Life.
Yeah, I will say that it's funny. To be able to replace a guy like Jaco Pastorius in a band like this is no easy feat. I will say, not on every album he appears on here with the band, but Victor Bailey is a terrific bass player.
Oh, he was a monster.
Yeah, and I think that on a couple of these albums, he's completely underused.
Yes.
I mean, and this is a trend that started on like the last album with Jaco, where Zawinul was starting to do a lot of these kind of bass patches on the synthesizers. It's like, when you got these monster talents on bass, why are you doing that? You don't need to do that, right? It's like, oh,
exactly.
It's just like puzzling, just totally puzzling. So my number 12 is Domino Theory, which is the only one I don't have. If you got a copy of that, if you want to flash it, that's from 1984.
Domino Theory.
There we go. Another gem of an album cover. I mean, here again, we just kind of continue with the albums are getting less and less interesting. I mean, look at the time period. It's 1984. So obviously we know what all the popular musical trends are at the time. And, Zawinul is investigating and buying and playing a lot of the latest, synth technology, but you're giving Wayne Shorter a lot less to do.
Hmm.
Victor Bailey, you almost don't even know he's on the album. You got Omar's doing some good drumming on here, but and there's some good songs on here, man. Swamp Cabbage is a great track.
Great song.
Title track is good. Predator is good. If you like a lot of the the more synth heavy stuff from Weather Report, this is one of those albums. So I don't think it's an awful album. It's better, I think, than the couple that I've already talked about. It's not a great album by any means, but there's a couple good tracks. And I think it's just kind of, you see where this band is kind of going. And I think that most of the guys are kind of losing interest. I think Zawinul was kind of ready to go on and do that next big thing, which, he would do after a couple more albums. So, not awful, not top shelf Weather Report, though, in my opinion.
Excellent. But we're probably, like you said, we're heading into that direction as far as those albums go. My next one is Weather Report 1982. Like I said, not to say that any of these albums, especially going forward, aren't great albums. It's just the fact that the top 5 are just what made the band. Excellent album. It has some great songs on there. Both of the Dire Factors are excellent. And NYC is pretty good. Speechless. But once again, this is the last album to feature Jaco Pastorius and Peter Erkson on drums. And you would think that, once again, for the talent that they have on here, and it's one of those albums where you see that direction going towards what Joseph Zawinul eventually would become in the latter part of his life.
Yeah. This was the end of the classic lineup, what most people consider the classic lineup. And just, I'll get to it in a minute, but I mean, you can kind of sense, listening to this album, that Jaco and Peter would be a little bored with what's going on here.
Yes.
It's absolutely. I'll get to that in a minute. Before, though, my number 11 is Procession from 1983.
All right.
Now, I kind of like this album cover.
Well,
right?
Very similar to Black Market.
Yes, true. Yes. Big and colorful, though. And it's not a terrible album. So here you've got, this is the first album with the new lineup. So you got Omar Hakim and Victor Bailey joining the band, and they're given a lot to do here. You got Jose Rossi on percussion. So 3 really tremendous players, and you get the sense that they're giving a little bit of new life to this band. Whereas I think on the album you just showed, you get the feeling that, there's a little bit of boredom setting in with some of the players. So I think there's some really good results on this album. So the title track, about 9 minutes, a lot of good grooves. I love the dueling sax and synth from Shorter and Zawinul. You got 2 lines, great song. Plaza Real is a great track with some
brilliant
amazing sax from Shorter on that. Molasses Run, great song. And I gotta say, this is the album that I referenced before. Victor Bailey is all over this album.
He is absolutely outstanding. And you could tell that there was life invigorated into that. But I'll get into that.
This is like the album you put on, you're like, Jaco who? It's like you don't miss him. But then they handcuff Victor on every album after this, which I never understood. But this is, for me, from this latter part of the era of the band, this is the album to check out first. If we have folks watching who are not familiar with all of this catalog, if you're going to investigate the latter part, I would say Procession, spit it out, Pete, it's Sunday, is the one to check out first.
Most definitely. Oh, man. All right. Well, my next one, it's kind of tough to put this one, these next 2 albums here. The band's second album, I Sing the Body Electric, an album that I love very much. This is a part right at about the time where they were still like in that cosmic jazz fusion period. The first half of the album is our studio songs, while the latter half is part of what makes up Live at Tokyo. Outstanding album. Brilliant album. I can't say any more words about this. Like I said, from here onward, in my opinion, I think that these albums just become absolutely great. So this is an album that if you've never checked it out, especially if you haven't gotten Live at Tokyo, it's a condensed version of that album, and the studio tracks are just outstanding.
Yeah. That's basically kind of like ZZ Top's. I'm drawing a blank.
I know which album you're talking about.
I'm drawing a complete blank here. Oh my god, I love the damn album. Everybody knows what it is. It's half live, half studio. This is basically their version of that. Yeah, and I will echo Chuck's statement about the live stuff. The Tokyo live album.
Oh.
And maybe we'll be talking about that on Tuesday nights in the Prague show. We might.
Yes.
Is absolutely fantastic. So like if you're like investigating this catalog for the first time and you check out I Sing the Body Electric, which I highly recommend you do, you're going to love the live stuff on there and you're going to want more. We'll just go get the Tokyo album, which has got the whole kit and caboodle. So yeah, here's where it gets tough, because we got a lot of really great albums here. And there's probably going to be some people like, oh my god, I Sing the Body Electric, kind of low. Yeah, but you know what, there's some great albums here. It's hard to kind of like distinguish some of these. So I'm going to go number 10 with their second self-titled album,
1982.
1982. I don't understand these bands that do that. I was just doing a ranking of another band recently, a couple days ago, where they did the exact same thing. I'm like, guys, come on. It's not that hard to throw a title on an album here. But this is again the last, like Chuck said, the last one with Jaco Pastorius and Peter Erskine. It's a good album. It's very dominated by Zawinul and the synths. He writes a lot of the material on here. Some great songs though. Volcano for Hire, NYC, like Chuck mentioned, is awesome. 10 plus minutes. Great sax and drums on that. Speechless has some great Pastorius bass lines. What else? Dara Factor 1 or 2. Solid album, but you can kind of see like why maybe Jaco and Peter were kind of getting a little disenchanted with things, because it's starting to become very dominated by Zawinul, but it's still a fun album, I think. So that's my number 10. And from here on in, almost impossible to rank these.
Oh, most definitely. Well, I have a bit more affinity for the Bailey, Akim section. I love the albums there, except the first two, that is.
Yeah. Yep.
The other two, I just is. My number 9 will be my number 9 will be Weather Report's Domino Theory. Can It Be Done is it's a vocal track. It's kind of mundane with that, but I think that everything else on this album actually fits very well. To me, the title track is probably the title track, Predator, The Peasant. Especially the title track on this album is just absolutely outstanding. That's where you really get to hear Victor's brilliant bass playing on there. But once again, right at about this time, Joseph Zawinul, I know that his saying was that Wayne got to play with other bands. He got to play on other projects, while he, no one approached him for a lot of stuff. So he basically had to put all his compositions and his vision into Weather Report. So I think that that's the reason why you got to hear him dominating all these albums. And it's Domino Theory. That's my number 9.
Cool. Cool. The next two here were, almost impossible for me to figure out. I knew they were both going to be right about this spot in the ranking, but they could flip flop at any time. But I'm going to go with Night Passage from 1980 as my number 9. Like I said, could rank higher. This is a great album.
Oh, it really
I had this
is.
on cassette back in the day, and
so did I.
Wore it out.
So did I.
I mean, it's a very keyboard dominated album, but this is like for me, it's kind of like at Weather Reports. They have a couple around in this era that are very easy on the ears. Like I hate to say easy listening, but I mean, it's just a fun, intoxicating group of songs. I think.
Madagascar.
Madagascar is amazing. It's amazing. The title track is so good. Dream Clock has that Jaco solo in it. Great.
Incredible.
Port of Entry.
Beautiful. Way short as only track.
Yeah, shorter, just squonking up a storm. 3 Views of a Secret.
Yes.
Again,
yes.
that's all Jaco, right? I mean, it's like this guy was such a brilliant player, and the ability for him to compose bass lines and melodies that just sing, right? I mean, it's just absolutely amazing. And Peter Erskine's drums on this album are really good. I don't know. This is
outstanding.
a really great album, and I debated like where to put this in the catalog. So this, you asked me next week, this could go 3 steps up. I mean, it's just it's that good. And like I said, there's the guys in the band. Yeah, that's a great album. Could rank higher. Night Passage from 1980.
Well, my next one on this one over here follows up, which is Procession.
Yeah.
Procession, another great album. But you got to hear that it invigorated the band. You got to hear all the songs on here, very well done. Victor Bailey and Omar Hakim, they're just brilliant on this album. Like I said, we've already spoken about how great this album is. A song that we didn't speak about was Where the Moon Goes.
Oh yeah.
Especially live. If you ever got to see them, or there's clips of them playing this song on YouTube, and they're having a fun time playing this song. But I think that it works better live than it does in the studio version. And Two Lines, just an amazing song.
Great. Yeah.
Oh man, so that's my take right there.
Good stuff. Yeah, I mean, you know what it is. I think if I didn't have such an affinity for the Jocko era, I probably would have ranked Procession higher, because I that is definitely my favorite of the latter albums.
Yes,
without question. And I think that really showed that lineup really clicking, which is good. I mean, like I said, it's not. We've talked a lot on the channel about replacing very important members of a band, and this is a perfect example of you got two key members of the band leaving, and you bring 2 new guys in. At the time, Omar and Victor really kind of unknown, right, for the most part, and they did a fine job. All right, Mr. Gone from 1978 is my number 8. Again, I had this on cassette back in the day, played this a ton. There's some great compositions on here. I totally agree with you, though, that some of these sound better on the live album. I absolutely agree with you. But I still love the songs. Here you have get Tony Williams on a couple tracks on here.
Yes.
And Steve Gadd.
Yes. Joseph Zawadu complained, he loved Tony, but he said he played too loud for him. He said that he said that he could just never tone down his drumming. So that's probably, I think, one of the reasons why he was able to why he was able to just dominate on his keyboard sound and never asked him back again.
Yep, exactly. Well, I think, this album was kind of like almost like an audition for 3 of them, right? Yes. So it's Peter Erskine, Tony Williams, and Steve Gadd. It's like, okay, I'm going to have you guys appear on a couple tracks each. Whoever I like the best is going to get the gig. Well, we know who got the gig, right? So. But there's some great songs on here, and you mentioned a few of them. Pursuit of the Woman with the Feathered Hat is awesome. River People, brilliant. I love. Young and Fine, Mr. Gone, Jocko's amazing playing on punk jazz. You got Pinocchio on here.
Great version too.
Yeah. It's just I really dig this album a lot, and I could even rank it higher. But I agree with you. When you hear live versions of these, you realize that how much of a monster album this could have been with maybe a little bit more energy. But I still dig it. I like it a lot.
All right. Well, I said, this is a tough one over here. It's Weather Reports from 1975, Tail Spinning. The only drawback that I have to this album is that it lacks that oomph. It's the second album with Alfonso Johnson on bass, and the only album to have Leon Chancellor as the drummer. Leon Chancellor went back to playing with Santana right after this, so he didn't get to tour this album. He just played on the album, did what he had to do, and then just went back to Carlos Santana afterwards. Brilliant album. If anybody ever gets to hear the live version of Freezing Fire, that's on the live album, just outstanding. Great album. Every single song on here is just absolutely brilliant. It's a highly recommended album, Tail Spinning from 1975.
I absolutely agree with you. It's also my number 7. Yeah, and it's interesting how, like, up until I think they got Peter Erskine in the band, I mean, they had like different drummers and percussion players like on every other album almost.
Yes.
Yeah, they were having a hard time keeping drummers, but yeah, this is a great album. This is their 5th album. Really good listen. Oh geez, I mean, you mentioned some of the great songs. Lusitanos, great grooves.
Badia.
Between the Thighs,
Yes,
awesome
Badia.
stuff. Badia, Man in the Green Shirt, just really good stuff. And again, this band has had great bass players. I mean, Alfonso Johnson, what more needs to be said? But what I love about this album, and I think you mentioned Freezing Fire, a great song too, is everybody's contributing.
Yes.
And that's the big difference between the early part of the Weather Report catalog and that latter part. It's like this was a true band. This wasn't just kind of Joe Zawinul's vision. You had everybody kind of contributing in the songwriting and the arranging and with solo spots and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, this is a terrific album. Could even rank higher, but that speaks how great the rest of these albums are.
Yes. There's a lot of, we forgot that there's a lot of Wayne Shorter on there too.
Oh yeah, big time, as all the early albums have. Yeah, he's a. You could say, arguably, Chuck, I guess, that early on in this catalog, this was Shorter and Zawinul's band.
Yes.
I mean, these are the two guys who wrote most of the songs, arranged most of the material, and you got used to that. And that's why I think listening to some of the latter albums where you don't really hear Wayne much. And it's like, well, it's like he's just there. He adds a couple solos here and there. And it's like, but you listen to the early stuff, he was such an integral part of the band.
Indeed. Well, this was a tough one, because this could have easily have wound up in my top 5. I had that separated from the rest of the albums that I had here. Weather Report's debut album from 1971. Very cosmic album, but that doesn't take away from the brilliance of the album. What's it? Wayne Shorter, but he really shined on this album. He was always a brilliant saxophonist and an otherworldly composer. But this is still his vision, along with Wayne Shorter. Very cosmic album. It's the debut album, the only album that had Alphonse Mouzon on there. And then also Airto on there, and the great Miroslav Vitos on there as well. Just an outstanding album. Eurydice, one of my favorite songs, one of my favorite compositions from Wayne Shorter. Waterfall, Orange Lady, which actually it was a song that Joseph Zawinul composed for Miles Davis. Umbrellas, just an outstanding album, but it's a very cosmic album. It's nothing like what they did afterwards.
No. And I mean, basically that album and even parts of I Sing the Body Electric it's basically the continuation of what those two guys were doing in Miles's band.
Yes.
Right. Not much different. So if you dig that kind of like Bitches Brew, Jack Johnson in a silent way direction that Miles was going in, and he had the help of both of those guys, that's kind of where they took Weather Report initially. Not long ago, right? Because that first album is completely different than everything after I Sing the Body Electric.
Exactly.
And a hard one, and Mouzon, man. One of the most underrated fusion drummers ever.
If not, he probably might be my favorite. And talk about all these great drummers that came out of that Billy Cobham, Lenny White. We could just go on, but he's my favorite of them all.
Yeah. I mean, those three guys you just mentioned. So Lenny White, Billy Cobham, Alphonse Mouzon, and Tony Williams. And you could throw any number of whoever you want the fifth guy to be, right? Steve Gadd, Peter Erskine, whoever. I mean, does it get any better than that in any genre?
Yes.
When it comes to bass to drummers, I mean, it doesn't get any better. Doesn't get any better. And Mouzon's got a bunch of really good solo albums too. I think if
a lot of R&B, a lot of them fell into the R&B-ish realm
and the funk stuff. Yeah, the latter ones, but still pretty good though.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that I gotta one of these days got to do like a show on his solo albums and Cobham's solo albums, and I still got to get to Tony Williams, and this is so much to do, so little time. Where are we? Number 6. I'm gonna go again, an album that could rank higher. I love it. Mysterious Traveler.
Brilliant.
1974. I apologize, everybody. All the dogs yapping in the background. My wife is a dog trainer, and she's got a session going in the backyard. And my 3 never seem to like the fact that that's happening.
Great ambience in the background.
It's like a symphony. We're getting this.
I guess they like Weather Report.
Yes, right. This is what happens when you own a couple Huskies, right? I mean, it's just, they sing. I sing the Husky Electric. Anyway, back to Mysterious Traveler. So this is the final album with Miroslav Vitus. He only appears on one track on here.
Yes.
But he is officially basically out of the band by the time this comes out.
Mhm.
Alfonso Johnson, now the full-time bassist. He's on the bulk of the album. This, I think, is the album where you're starting to hear more of that funk and R&B oriented material starting to creep into the music. Not that it's a bad thing, because I think this is a very upbeat album. It's very lively, very groove oriented. You got Ishmael Wilburn on drums, Nubian Sundance. There's a great song.
Oh man,
right?
very energetic.
Cucumber Slumber. I mean, awesome. The title track is great. A lot of great Fender Rhodes tones on this album. And I think that as much as Zawinul got into utilizing all different kinds of synths on later albums, this Fender Rhodes playing is so underrated. I mean, so underrated. I mean, he's like, you got to mention him at the same level almost with Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock and, you know, all those other guys that we always think about, Jan Hammer. I mean, this guy was a great Rhodes player. Great sax on here. Love the title track. Scarlet Woman's another great one. It's, this is
lovely
a
track.
classic, a classic.
Oh, brilliant. Well, now we're getting into the top 5. And this was very tough because there are a few albums that, that I picked beforehand that I could easily have put in there. My number 5 is Night Passage. I have a very big affinity for this album. Once again, Jaco Pastorius and Peter Erikson, percussionist Robert Thomas, forgive me, Jr. Brilliant on this album. Dream Clock. It's just one of my favorite songs. Once again, Dream Clock, Madagascar, the title track, all beautiful songs. That's probably an album, if anybody was to ever want to listen to Weather Report, and it's probably the most mellowest. Right here, it's a great album. Virtuosic playing, but yet it's still a nice, beautiful, mellow album.
Yeah, I would say if I was going to recommend a Weather Report album to someone who has never heard them before and maybe not the biggest jazz fan in the world or just doesn't know a lot about jazz, that album and this album would be my recommendations because they're both the most accessible, maybe, perhaps. Like I would never recommend the first album or I Sing the Body Electric to a newbie, right? But I think, and I like I said before, I could have ranked Night Passage higher. I love it quite a bit. And I could have ranked this higher too. If we would have done this show like maybe 20 years ago, this might have been my number 1 because again, this is the first album you get into with Weather Report and everybody has a soft spot for it. I just think that over time I've grown to love some of their other albums a little bit more than this one, but this is amazing. Right. This is their biggest selling album. I mean, this went gold.
Yes.
That's a big deal for an album like this back in the day, right? This is the first one with Jaco full-time in the band, right? He appears on the album before, but he's firmly entrenched in the band. Birdland, huge hit. You hear it all over the place, right? I mean, who can't miss that melody, right? And that fretless bass man that he plays on it's just amazing. Teen Town, incredible. Palladium, loads of percussion and stuff going on, and that's just great. The Juggler, you got Alex Acuna on this album, who's an amazing player. Havana. Sorry, I always say that wrong.
Havana.
Another great song with just some amazing bass playing on it. Very accessible, but still pretty demanding, I think, on the ears, right? And everybody's writing here. I mean, this is the band at their absolute creative peak, and this album sounds terrific.
Didn't need any remastering, just fantastic.
No, I mean,
something about 1976.
Yeah. I mean, this is the Columbia Jazz Contemporary Masters remaster from when did this even come out? 30 years ago. I mean, it just sounds amazing, but this album originally sounded great. One of the best sounding, in my opinion, jazz fusion albums of all time. I mean, this to me ranks up there as far as like sonic clarity and earworm whatever with like Romantic Warrior, I mean, this is a great sounding album. And that's why, generally speaking, if you've never heard Weather Report, I'll say go listen to Heavy Weather.
Yes.
Because it's just a great sounding album. The compositions are great. It's so melodic. They have more challenging music in their catalog, but that's just such a can't miss album, right? And yet it's my number 5, right?
Let's tell you, the other 4 might just be much that greater. My number 4 is probably the most transitional album, because it took them from being that cosmic jazz fusion band to a real funky groove oriented band. What's a Sweetnighter? I mean, forgive me. Yes, Sweetnighter. Brilliant album. Not a single bad album. I mean, bad song on here. Just a great, great album. Miroslav Vidos, although he loved funk music, but he just couldn't play it. He just was one of these guys that was just classically trained as an upright bassist and played the electric bass pretty well, but for the vision that these guys were going, he just couldn't play most of that stuff. So I know that they said that they had the trumpet player Herb Williams, I forgot his name, but he played the bass on there, or electric bass on most of those tracks as well. Great album, Boogie Woogie Waltz. Will, Adios. It's just a great album. I would recommend this album for those that love groove oriented, jazz oriented music. Great album. That's my number 4.
More about that in a few minutes. I'm going to go number 4 with I Sing the Body Electric from 1972. I love this album. So here we got a lot of lineup changes early on. So Muzan and Miera are out. You got Eric Gravatt and Dom Romeo. I don't even know how he says his name.
Romeo.
Okay. They're in the band now. This is, again, mixing, like Chuck talked about, that kind of avant-garde cosmic jazz type of thing. Definitely atmospheric. I mean, Wayne Shorter on The Unknown Soldier is just amazing. You got the first guitar ever on a Weather Report album. You got Ralph Towner from Oregon.
What a beautiful song too.
Oh, the Moors, man, it's great. I could have heard more of that, right? Because Towner is like off the charts great. That's a guy nobody ever talks about. He's so good. I love that Oregon stuff. That's another band I need to do a ranking over something. I love that stuff. Crystal is great. That's the studio stuff. Then you got the amazing live tracks, which again you can hear in full on the Tokyo album. And this is just a smoking album. I think I just love it, and that is just a awesomely cool album cover. I think it's like puzzling but cool at the same time. I mean, you talk about cosmic, right? I mean, that's like, just look at that. It's like that's off like a Robert E. Heinlein book or something like that. It's like great stuff. So that's my number 4.
Oh man, well, as much as I hate to do this over here, but I just love the 2 albums before this. The great Heavy Weather. Pete already spoke pretty highly of everything about this album. It's just a band at their peak. Not a single weak track on there. A Remark You Made, just a beautiful saxophone from Wayne Shorter, Jocko's bass and the end. It's just a great composition from Joseph Zawinul. Highly recommended. Perhaps the band at their peak. And if anyone wanted to get into this band, I would say that would be the album to get into. Jocko once again became a full-time player on the album. Alex Acuna is the drummer and percussionist. Manuel Bandera, is the percussionist, and can't say too much about Havana as well. Another great ending track to this album. Now, my number 3 is once again Heavy Weather from Weather Report.
And basically the legend that was and is Jaco Pastorius. Basically, that was his coming out party.
Yes.
I mean, I mean, that's the album that got him, noticed by all the guitar magazines and the general public as the guy to, because before him, you had like Stanley Clarke, right, and a bunch of other jazz players. But man, when Jaco hit the scene, it's like throw all that out the window, right? This is the new guy, right? Yeah. All right, number 3, I'm going to go with the debut from 71, Weather Reports. Everything that Chuck said, absolutely, I totally agree. Eurydice. Is that how you say that?
Eurydice.
Milky Way umbrellas. I mean, this is very different from what came after it. You know, that this and this are the kind of outliers in the catalog, and that they don't sound like anything else. It's very avant-garde, very atmospheric, and lots of soloing, and it's that continuation from the Miles band. But it's just, there's some great stuff on here, and Miroslav's bass work is awesome on this
album. Unbelievable.
You know, we're talking about great bass players, right? We're gushing about Jaco and Victor Bailey and Alphonso Johnson. Man, Miroslav Vitus, great player. Whether it's you listen to him on these albums or his solo stuff, or the stuff he did with Chick Corea and
he did stuff with Chick Corea. Did a few things with it's gonna come to me.
The Norwegian guitar player who I'm drawing a blank on. Terje Ripdahl.
Ripdahl. That's it. Yes. Thank you.
They did an album together that is one of the greatest fusion albums of all time, right? So yeah, we're a great bass player, whether he's playing the acoustic bass or electric, and he's got that big, you know, where, you know, like Jaco's like this lyrical player. Victor Bailey's funky and lyrical, but like, man, Miroslav has got this big booming, like almost fuzz laden sound that I love. And that's why I love these first two albums, because he's just like all over them. Well, in the first three albums actually, but yeah, great bass player. That, I mean, every bass player that's been in this band has been terrific. So I think we can safely say that. And now we approach the top two.
All right. Well, my top two, my number two is just that album, just a great album from the band. My top two is Mysterious Traveler. Pete already said everything about this album.
Don't you love when a great album makes you speechless? You're like, what can you say about it? It's just great. Yeah.
They still had a bit of that cosmic, cosmic avant-garde and a couple of tracks there, but overall, it's a more refined version of Sweetnighter. Sadly, it's the last album to feature Miroslav Vitus on American Tango. And then everything else is just Alphonso Johnson, Cucumber Slumber, one of those songs that you thought that you might have heard elsewhere. I don't want to say anything else about that. Jungle Book is a beautiful, nice folky track. Scarlet Woman, another great song, which is a song that was composed by three of the members in the band. What's another great track? The title track, Mysterious Traveler. It's another beautiful song. And Nubian Sundance, if that doesn't get you hyped.
Great song. Yep.
So that's my number two, Mysterious Traveler, Weather Report.
Yeah, I honestly, you can't argue with any ranking of these, the top ones, because they're all so good. And like, we could do this a month from now, and probably my ranking might change a little bit. My number two, this one, along with Heavy Weather, were probably my favorites for many, many years. And I think over time, my love for this album still is almost pretty much the same as it always has been. Black Market. I mean, this is just terrific. This is so good. So this is the first album with Jaco. He doesn't play on the whole album, but his presence is really felt here on the couple tracks with him. And of course, on the back, he's there in the band pick on the back, even though he, just really joined the band, right? So, you still have Alphonso Johnson on the bulk of the album, but again, this is a very rhythmic, listenable album. You got two other drum legends on this album, Narada Michael Walden, who we didn't talk about before, and Chester Thompson. I mean, again, just Alex Acuna and Don Elias on percussion. I mean, this is just jam-packed with great talent. Man, Cannonball, Black Market, Haranu, Barbary Coast, Elegant People. I mean, it's just grooves everywhere you turn. Great sax. Cannonball, of course, dedicated to Cannonball Adderley, right? The great player there. Just an amazing album that signaled what was to come in a great way. It's almost like this album kind of closed the book on what happened before and opened up the door to the next chapter of Weather Report. And for me, that's I think one of the reasons why I love this album so much, because it's like the best of both worlds.
Yes.
and it holds up so well. I mean, this is just so you could put this on anytime and just, man, just like feel the love coming through the music. It's so good. So good.
Well, now that we've already,
I think I know what your number one is.
Yes, most definitely, Black Market. This album, I've recommended it to a few friends of mine, and they totally agreed with how great this album is. You know, Jocko once again made his debut on a couple of albums, even contributed one of his compositions in Barbary Coast.
Yep.
Nice little funky song. Just a brilliant album. From the opening track, Black Market, the title track, all the way down to Heratnu. Just a brilliant album. Not a single weak moment on here. The song that really gets me on here is Cannonball. You listen to that, the lyrically closing of Jocko's bass on here, you knew he was no one to reckon with. He was in a league of his own by this time. Black Market, Weather Report is my all-time favorite. It's actually in my top 10 overall albums. You know, when I rank everything in there, I just love that album so much.
Yeah, it's a gem, an absolute gem, a classic of this, style of music we're talking about. Yeah, I had a hard time with this upper part of this ranking here, and for this time, I've had Sweetwater. Sweetnighter, sorry, Sweetwater. Sweet. I mean, this is an album that, again, I talked before about if we would have done this ranking 20 years ago, it would be completely different. But I have found that from the early part of the catalog that my love for Sweetnighter has grown immensely in recent years. And I just think, this is the third album. Here, I think, is where the band really figured out the direction they were going into. As great as Body Electric and the self-titled is, I think here is where the band starts to incorporate, that funk, boogie woogie waltz. I mean, come on, piano with wah-wah, electric piano with wah-wah, brilliant stuff, right? 125th Street Congress, amazing track. Will, you talked about before, just Adios. I mean, so many great tracks on here. Manoliti, nice and melodic. Love the sax on there from Shorter. This is the last album with Miroslav as a full-time bassist. And you feel his loss for a little bit, but again, they've had so many great bass players that kind of just come in and completely take over that. You don't really miss any of these guys too long because they just bring greatness into the band to replace them with. So, but I love the sound of this album. It's just a classic fusion album. And again, today, this is my number one. Next week, it might be this one again. It's hard. It's really hard. These are, for me, I would easily say like this stack here is mandatory Weather Report. I think that these two are pretty close to being mandatory. And then the bottom three are kind of like, you can probably do without. But man, this stack to me is treasured music.
The defining jazz fusion right there, literally, with that era. Some note on Sweetnighter. Joseph Zawinul didn't want to let go of Eric Gravatt. He considered him his favorite drummer of all the drummers that he ever played with on Weather Report. But Eric Gravatt was more so a jazz drummer. Him playing jazz funk, in that direction, he found it hard. So I know that according to him, that when he let him go, that Joseph Zawinul actually went into like a bit of a depression from that.
Really?
Because he really liked that, and as well as Gravatt as well, because Gravatt, he thought that he had it big with this band because he saw the vision, but he just wasn't a funk drummer. Yeah. I have some boots from that early period. That matter of fact, that's one of the reasons why I actually put Mato Grosso Fiel on my page a couple of days ago. I have a bootleg from 1971 when Alphonse Mouzon was still with the band, and they absolutely did a killer version of that song. It's just sad that they never actually put it onto any of their Weather Report albums, but that's Weather Report in an Ocean. It's one of my favorite bands of all time. As a matter of fact, I consider them my number two behind Genesis. Genesis was my gateway to these guys. because of Chester Thompson. And I can't speak anymore about Weather Report. They're my favorite jazz fusion band. I love practically everything that they've done, despite the last two albums being quite weak. Actually, not weak. There's still good songs on there, but like you said, you saw the vision of Joseph Zawinu coming through on those albums, and it's a shame because you really never got to hear the true brilliance of Victor Bailey and Omar Akim until they left the band.
True. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that Victor Bailey solo album that he put out on Atlantic, I believe it was, like shortly after Weather Report kind of broke up, and I was like, holy moly, what a monster this guy is. And I think I heard that before I actually heard the Weather Report albums that he played on. So I was like, geez. Yeah, and this is an interesting band because when you look at like a lot of the fusion acts from this time period, to my knowledge, one of only a couple that did not have a guitar player.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Although, according to Joseph Zawinu, he said he wanted to, but he said that he didn't want to, he thought that Wayne Shorter, that his saxophone was a bit outdated in comparison to the technology of the time. Because, Wayne Shorter, he's a brilliant saxophone player, whether it's on soprano or tenor. And he was, he felt that by that time, Michael Brecker was playing like an electric saxophone, the Lyricon, and I think David Sanborn, the same thing. And, Wayne Shorter was just too great for that,
Well, he was old school too. I mean, he was, because the guys you mentioned and Tom Scott and all that was kind of like the new wave of sax players coming out. And, Wayne went back a ways. I mean, he's from the bebop era, so the post-bop era. So, I've always kind of pictured what Weather Report would have sounded like with a full-time guitar player.
Oh, well, I think I read somewhere that they tried to recruit a couple of guys, but they didn't want it to be that electric. They didn't want like one of these guys that's
like, could you imagine like Mike Stern in Weather Report alongside Shorter and Jaco? Could you just like picture that? Is there enough room for all of those soloists, and Zawinul, right? I don't know.
No, it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, that might have been too busy. We can dream, right? I would have loved to have heard one album of that, but anyway, so there you have it, everybody. Ranking the catalog of Weather Report. Did you want to talk a little bit about some of the live albums? Just
the live album? Sure.
Recommend them. Yeah. I mean,
okay. What's up? We spoke highly in regards to their first album, Live in Tokyo, which was their first one with Eric Gravatt and Don Umuramao on percussions, and Miroslav was still a bass player. Outstanding. When you got to hear these songs being fleshed out live, directions, if they wanted to hear a lively version, which is also on I Sing the Body Electric. And then the album that everybody knows from the band, 830, once again, another well-polished, great sounding album. Jaco just kills on there. Peter Erskine on drums. Then you have the album that came out a little bit before Joseph had passed away, Live and Unreleased.
Yeah, that's quite good too.
And then Joseph's recently deceased son, who was the curator of the band's music, Weather Report Live. Another great album which featured from 1978 through 1981 the most famous band, Erskine and Jaco. Another outstanding album. All recommended. All great albums. That's my take on that. I don't want to go too much into it because I know that we're going to be doing a little live album session.
Yeah, we don't want to get too much away. So, we'll announce it right now. So coming up on In the Prog Seat on Tuesday night, alongside Anthony Ferraro and George Lamy, we are going to discuss our, how many did we say? 10, right?
10
each? Mm-hmm. 10 each of our favorite live albums that fall within the Prog Seat show format, which is progressive rock, progressive metal, jazz fusion. We can pick whatever we want, and we're each going to give our 10 favorite live albums from those three styles of music. So that's coming up on Tuesday night. For those of you that love live albums, stay tuned for that. And we may hear a couple of Weather Report selections in that in that list from some of us, right? So we'll see. So everybody in the comments below, feel free to rank the Weather Report catalog, or if you want to do all 14, your top 5, top 10, whatever you want to do. I'm sure Chuck and I will be kind of checking out those comments and seeing what everybody comes up with. And I want to thank Mr. Alvarez, Sir Chuck Alvarez, from joining us here today on this another fine edition of Ranking the Albums. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. Coming up tomorrow, we've got Hudson Valley Squares tomorrow night, in addition to a very fine show. I have not announced it yet, so we're going to do it right now. We've got Mr. Mike Portnoy. We've got Mr. Kurt Vanderhoof from Metal Church. We've got Jim Bocci from Hitman. We're going to be doing a show, the four of us, all about our favorite power pop albums.
Oh, excellent.
Something a little bit different, right? So that's happening tomorrow night as well. So stay tuned for that. And then Tuesday, we got In the Prague Seat, the two of us, along with our two compatriots, talking about favorite live albums and all sorts of stuff happening the rest of the week. You don't want to miss any of it. Martin Popoff coming back next Friday. We're going to do part 2 of classic albums with terrible album cover art. That's coming up next Friday. So, and all sorts of other stuff happening throughout the week. So stay tuned for all that. Monsters Den on Thursday night. We're going to be talking about the movie Spookies. We got one of the directors of the Spookies coming on the show. So all sorts of stuff happened this week, guys. So stay tuned for all of that and more. For Chuck Alvarez, I am Pete Pardo. See you all later on. Take care.
Be well.